At the end of the previous video, we talked about any instance method. They can invoke access any instance method or data attribute. And they can invoke static method and the static data attribute. But for the static method, they cannot access or invoke an instance method. They only can invoke or access static method. Why? Because static method belong to the class. Once the class is defined, we have the static method and the static variable memory location defined. So that's why they can access any static method and data attribute. But what are instance method and instance data attribute? Instance method and instance data attribute, remember, they belong to a object. So that's why the static method live when the class defined. But when you have a class defined, doesn't mean you have any object created yet. So that's why when we have the static method, we cannot guarantee any instance method or instance variable being created. So that's why they cannot access that. For example, you can see in last week we have this circle class. We have the instance variable radius, but we have the static variable is number of object. So this number of object and the get number of object method, they are static. So they being created after the circle class is defined. But radius is what? Radius variable cannot be defined until your object is created. So that's why instance variable or instance method, we cannot guarantee they can be accessed the instance method. So here, if you're still not quite sure, so we will show you this example. This example actually we call the test.java file. You can download and run. So this one we define the test class and we have the main method. The test class, we have one instance variable is I. The other variable is static variable is k. Then you have one instance method. You have one static method. Right, you see static method M2 only can call static method. So max.power is a static method. But you see here for the M1 is the instance method. Instance method not only can access the I is instance variable, you also can access your static variable. Because static variable and static method being created after the class is defined. So that's why here, then we have a main function, right? So our main function actually in the main is that create a local variable j. I try to access I. Can I do that? No, you cannot do that. Main method is an instant. Oh, main method is what kind of method? Main method is the static method. Static method, you cannot access the I because I is what? I is instance variable. They belong to an object. So when you do that, right, you will see, I want you to check what the error message your Eclipse gave you. And also in the static method, I cannot invoke M1. M1 is the instance method as well. So that's why I want you to see what error message from your Eclipse they show you. And here is we show you how to correct that. Okay, how to correct this one? Actually, the easier way is we just create an object first. Then you can access I and M1. Or you can see here, we do like this. Actually, this one is exactly the same as earlier, just I put in the demo file you can run. So, and after you run that, what you need to do, replace, you just need to replace line 7, line 8 with here. You need to create an object. This one is not a test because in our simple code. So you need to create a test t equal to the new test. So afterward, right, then you can access your instance method, instance variable, and the instance method. Okay, so that's I hope you understand. And also you need to make sure you need to download the test.java file and run it. After we finish the static variable and static method, this video I will continue to talk about the immutable object and the class. Yeah, you heard about immutable object we talked about in the past couple weeks. We talked about the string object is the immutable object. So since you want to create the immutable object, definitely you need to define immutable classes. So this section we want to talk about is how to define a class is immutable. On the other hand, how to define a class after you create the object from this class, none of their data attribute can be updated. Can you think about how? Right, actually here is the most important part. If a class is immutable, all the data field must be private. Then you say, does not all my data field is private? Right, suppose that actually if you already define all your class with the data attribute is private, you already create the immutable class. But you need to be careful. Not only that, you also need to make sure you don't provide any public setter method for any data field. So then we can make sure our data never being updated. Right, before we say, right, all the UML diagram we show you, right, they are private data. But one thing is, we give them the setter function. So that's why they still can be allowed to update. And of course, later we will talk about more. The setter method, not only you can update the private attribute, you should validate data. For example, you see loan amount. If we say, oh, the loan amount, I want only do the loan amount for 5,000 above. So then we need to make sure every time you do the set loan amount, right, you need to check if the new value is greater than 5,000. So that's why here, right, we already make all the data attributes private. But in order to make the immutable object, you need to make sure you have no setter method provide. So a class with all private data and a new setter function, they are kind of ready for the immutable. So you see here, we just say it's not necessarily immutable. This just kind of we say is good enough, but we need to show you more here. We need to be more careful. I need to add one more condition. A mutable and immutable object. The first thing, all the data field should be private. That's one. Two, no mutator, no setter function. Then we need to add three. The three is the private data cannot be object. So we see this example. We have the student class example here. The student class, we have the ID string and they created. For example, for you guys, maybe we can say that they registered. You registered for this class. So of course, now you already know very well about the class defined. You should know how should we do the constructor, how we do the getter function. So then how we have the getter function get name and get they created. Right, you see actually here. Can I say this student class is immutable? They kind of almost ready, right? Because they have private data. They only have getter function. They don't have setter function. So the only thing they make them now ready is line 4. Okay, line 3. You see they are private string name. Okay, string actually, you see private primitive data type int. Definitely they are okay. They only make by copy. So then by private string name, our name is an string object. String object is dangerous because object, when we have object, right? Object is passing by reference. But this one is good because string object, did you remember what we called string object before? String object is immutable or not? Right, string object is immutable. So that's why here, even we try to assign the name, they are immutable, they are fine. But one thing is private date. Date is not an immutable object. Date is a mutable object. We can change the date. So now we need to add the third requirement is when you have the object as your data attribute, right? Not only you are private, we need to be careful. If you still give them the getter function, you still return the object. So then we will show you here. So now I have the test class to test the new student. So then I create a student. But then you see I get the student date. So this date I can assign to another date. So then you see this one actually they can set the date object itself is not immutable. So we can set the new date. So because this one, because we assign by reference. So in this line I update the date created is new date. They also affect the student date created because the date is an mutable object. So that's why the date created field in the student is changed. So that's why here let me give you the final list how to implement a class to be immutable. The first thing, all the data field must be private. Check, because we do that for every class defined. Second, there cannot be any mutator method. So no setter function. Check. Okay. Then, addition to that, we need to be careful. We can have a getter function, right? But you need to be careful. For the getter function, you cannot return a reference to a data field. And this data field is mutable. Like earlier, we can have a get name, but the name is string. String itself is immutable, so they are okay. But now here, when you have your get date, when you have get date is you return the date object. Date object is not immutable, it's mutable. So that's why when we pass in the reference, they can be update their object content. So that's why instead to return the date object to be a reference, so what we should do is we should change that to a immutable object. So one thing is we can return the date object, the return type become a string. So how to do that? For any object, if you call toString method, they will give you the string to represent that object. So that's how we will change from the student class. So you will have the get date created change to the return type is string. So then when we return, instead we return date created, we return the toString. So that's immutable class. So afterward, if I want to ask you to write an immutable class, can you do that? Yeah, definitely you can do that. So at the end for this video, besides we talk about immutable class, example is string. So here actually we have couple more slides. We give you another example is big integer and big decimal. So the big integer and decimal, they are also immutable class. So that's why here I don't show you the detailed example. I just want you to make sure you read through the example from the next couple slides. So then that's another example about two classes, they are immutable class.